She's been having severe episodes for months, my mother told the judge, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she hadn't actually used once. We just want what's best for her. She's not capable of managing her own affairs anymore. I sat at the defendant's table in a courtroom, fighting for the right to control my own trust fund, listening to my own mother describe a person I didn't recognize, a fragile, unstable version of me that existed nowhere except in the story she and my uncle had spent 4 months carefully constructing. I didn't say a word during her testimony. I just reached for the folder my attorney had prepared, the one containing 6 recordings my mother had no idea I possessed. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit the like button now. If you've ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you, comment here below. And subscribe to Story Retribution because today's ending proves that karma always arrives, just not when people expect it. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago, leaving me a substantial trust fund set to fully vest when I turned 28. An inheritance he'd carefully structured specifically to ensure I could access it independently, without requiring family approval or oversight once I reached that age. My 28th birthday was 6 months away when everything I'm about to describe began. My mother, Renata, and my uncle Victor had both been passed over in my grandfather's will, receiving comparatively modest inheritances compared to the trust designated specifically for me, his only grandchild. I never fully understood the depth of resentment this created until it started manifesting in ways I couldn't initially recognize as deliberate. The small betrayal happened about 5 months ago, when my mother began commenting, casually at first, about how stressed I seemed that during a demanding period at my job as a hospital pharmacist. "You've seemed really overwhelmed lately," she'd say during phone calls. Or, "Are you sleeping okay? You sound different." I brushed off the comments, genuinely appreciative of what I assumed was maternal concern during a busy season at work. The bigger betrayal began revealing itself about 4 months ago, though I didn't understand its true shape until much later. My mother started insisting, with increasing frequency, that I see a doctor just to check in, framing it as routine self-care rather than anything alarming. When I resisted, citing my demanding schedule, she grew more persistent, eventually showing up at my apartment unannounced, with an appointment already scheduled at a psychiatric practice I'd never heard of. I went, mostly to placate her, assuming a single consultation would resolve her concerns. The psychiatrist, a man named Dr. Holloway, asked unusually specific questions during that first appointment. Questions about erratic spending, about mood swings, about impulsive decision-making, framed in ways that felt oddly leading rather than exploratory. I answered honestly, describing normal work stress, nothing resembling the pattern his questions seemed to be fishing for. I didn't think much of it until my mother scheduled a second appointment 2 weeks later, insisting Dr. Holloway wanted a follow-up, again showing up unannounced to ensure I attended. This time, my uncle Victor accompanied us, sitting quietly in the waiting room, but somehow, I later learned, having spoken with Dr. Holloway privately before my actual session began. Something started feeling deeply wrong during that second appointment. Dr. Holloway's questions grew more pointed, referencing specific incidents I had no memory of. A supposed argument with a coworker my mother claimed I'd described to her in distress. A spending spree on my credit card that, when I checked my actual statements later that night, simply hadn't happened. I confronted my mother about the discrepancies, and she grew defensive, insisting I must not remember clearly, suggesting gently but persistently that my memory lapses were themselves evidence something was wrong. I remember feeling a specific, disorienting kind of fear that night, the fear of being told by someone you trust completely that your own perception of reality might not be reliable. I am, by profession, someone trained to notice details, to cross-reference information carefully, to never simply trust a single source without verification. That training, more than anything else, is what eventually saved me. I started documenting everything after that second appointment, initially just for my own peace of mind, uncertain whether I was genuinely losing track of things or whether something more troubling was happening. I kept a detailed daily log of my actual activities, my actual spending, my actual conversations, comparing them meticulously against whatever my mother or Dr. Holloway later claimed had occurred. The pattern that emerged over the following 6 weeks was unmistakable. Every incident my mother described to Dr. Holloway during appointments I wasn't present for, every symptom she reported on my behalf, was either significantly exaggerated or entirely fabricated. My actual life, carefully documented in my own daily log, showed no erratic spending, no missed work days, No concerning behavioral patterns whatsoever. I began recording our conversations, legally, in a state that permitted single-party consent, initially out of self-protection rather than any specific plan, wanting simply to have accurate records of what was actually being said, versus what my mother might later claim. 3 weeks ago, during a conversation I recorded on my phone, sitting in my mother's kitchen, I overheard something through the thin wall separating the kitchen from the adjoining study, where my mother had stepped away to take a call from Victor, apparently believing I couldn't hear the conversation clearly. "We just need Holloway's report finalized before her birthday," my mother said, her voice hushed but audible. "Once we have guardianship in place, the trust reverts to family control regardless of what Dad's lawyers originally structured. We just need a few more weeks of documentation showing the instability." I sat frozen at that kitchen table, my recorder still running, listening to my own mother discuss, in explicit detail, a plan to fabricate a psychiatric case against me specifically timed to intercept my inheritance before I turned 28. I didn't confront her immediately. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening, needed legal guidance before taking any action that might tip them off before I had enough evidence to protect myself completely. I contacted an attorney the following morning, a careful, experienced woman named Miss Delacroix, who specialized in guardianship and conservatorship disputes, explaining everything I documented, playing her the recording from my mother's kitchen. She confirmed gravely that what I was describing matched a recognized pattern of conservatorship abuse, families deliberately manufacturing psychiatric evidence to seize control of an inheritance before it could fully vest. Ms. Delacroix helped me build a comprehensive case over the following 3 weeks. We obtained my actual financial records, showing no unusual spending patterns whatsoever. We obtained my actual employment records from the hospital, showing perfect attendance and consistently strong performance reviews throughout the exact period my mother claimed I'd been unstable. We requested Dr. Holloway's complete file, discovering through careful legal channels that several incident reports in my chart had been submitted entirely by my mother and Victor, without any direct observation or verification from Dr. Holloway himself, a practice Ms. Delacroix noted was concerning enough to warrant a formal complaint to the state medical board. Most critically, I continued documenting conversations legally, capturing 5 additional recordings over the following weeks that further confirmed the scope of the plan. My mother coaching me, subtly, before a 3rd psychiatric appointment, suggesting specific phrases and behaviors that would help Dr. Holloway understand what she called my struggles. Phrases I now recognized as deliberately designed to manufacture symptoms, rather than accurately describe anything real. 10 days ago, my mother and Victor filed a formal petition for emergency guardianship, using Dr. Holloway's compromised assessment as their primary evidence, requesting immediate control over my trust fund, for my own protection, scheduling a hearing just 8 days before my 28th birthday, precisely timed, as I now fully understood, to intercept the inheritance before it could vest independently. I retained Ms. Delacroix formally, and together we prepared a complete counter case, ready to present everything: the documented daily logs, the financial records, the employment records, and, most devastatingly, the 6 recordings capturing my mother and Victor discussing their plan in explicit, undeniable detail. The courtroom hearing happened yesterday. My mother testified first, describing, with practiced emotion, a fragile, unstable version of me struggling with severe episodes, erratic behavior, and dangerous impulsivity, painting a portrait so convincingly distressed that several courtroom observers glanced at me with visible concern and sympathy. "She's been having severe episodes for months," my mother told the judge. "We just want what's best for her. She's not capable of managing her own affairs anymore." Victor testified next, corroborating her account with fabricated details about supposed erratic phone calls, supposed confused conversations, all of it delivered with the same practiced sincerity. When Ms. Delacroix's turn came, she began methodically, presenting my actual financial records first, showing the judge my consistent, responsible spending patterns throughout the exact period my mother claimed instability had begun. She presented my employment records next, my supervisor's written statement confirming perfect attendance and consistently strong performance. Then she requested permission to play the first recording. The courtroom fell silent as my mother's own voice filled the room, discussing with Victor the plan to finalize Dr. Holloway's report before my birthday, discussing guardianship reverting the trust to family control. My mother's face drained of color entirely, her carefully constructed testimony collapsing in real time as the judge listened, her expression shifting from neutral professionalism to something considerably more severe. Wait, what? My mother's own attorney whispered, glancing at her with visible alarm, clearly hearing this evidence for the first time himself. Ms. Delacroix played the second recording, then the third, each one further confirming the deliberate, calculated nature of the fabrication. My mother coaching specific phrases before appointments, discussing the timing precisely around my upcoming birthday, discussing at one devastating point how convincing I would need to seem for the guardianship petition to succeed. Victor, sitting beside my mother at the petitioner's table, had gone completely rigid, his earlier composed testimony now sitting exposed as deliberate perjury in front of the judge. The judge turned directly to my mother. "Ms. Ashford," she said, her voice sharp with barely contained anger. "Do you understand the severity of what you've just been recorded discussing? Fabricating psychiatric evidence to seize control of your daughter's legally protected inheritance is not simply a custody matter. This constitutes fraud, potentially criminal conspiracy, and a serious violation of this court's trust." My mother said nothing, her hands trembling visibly at the petitioner's table. Dr. Holloway, present as a witness for the petition, shifted uncomfortably in his seat near the back of the courtroom. The judge addressed him directly next. "Dr. Holloway, your file contains multiple incident reports submitted entirely by the petitioners without direct clinical observation. Can you explain this documentation practice?" Dr. Holloway's composed professional demeanor cracked visibly. "I trusted the family's account of her behavior between our sessions," he said, his voice unsteady. "I understand now that trust may have been misplaced." "Significantly misplaced," the judge said. "I'll be forwarding this matter to the State Medical Board for formal review." The family reactions unfolded slowly in the courtroom gallery, where a handful of extended relatives had gathered to observe. My aunt, my mother's own sister, sat with her hand pressed over her mouth, visible shock and heartbreak crossing her face as the recordings played. The judge, after a lengthy pause reviewing the complete evidence, denied the guardianship petition entirely, dismissing it with strong language condemning the attempted fabrication, and additionally referred the matter for criminal investigation given the clear evidence of conspiracy to defraud. I sat at the defendant's table, my trust fund fully protected, my mother and uncle facing potential criminal charges, feeling an overwhelming, complicated mixture of relief and devastating grief that this had ever happened at all. The emotional resolution didn't arrive as satisfaction, walking out of that courtroom. My mother, someone I had trusted my entire life, had spent 4 months systematically trying to convince the world, and at times nearly convincing me, that I was someone fundamentally different from who I actually was, all in pursuit of money that had never been intended for her. I didn't speak to my mother again after that hearing. Some betrayals, I've learned, don't leave room for reconciliation, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because the specific nature of what was attempted, questioning my own grip on reality, manufacturing evidence against my sanity itself, created a wound too foundational to simply move past. The final lesson settled over me slowly in the weeks that followed. Turning 28, finally accessing the trust fund my grandfather had specifically protected against exactly this kind of manipulation, understanding now, painfully, exactly why he'd structured it with such careful independence. My mother had spent 4 months assuming that a daughter's trust in her own parent would remain unshakable enough to withstand systematic gaslighting, assuming that questioning my memory, my perception, my basic grip on reality would eventually wear me down into genuine confusion rather than careful, documented resistance. She mistook my quiet compliance during those early appointments for vulnerability she could continue exploiting indefinitely. She never imagined that the daughter she was trying to convince the world was unstable would turn out to be exactly precise enough, exactly methodical enough to document every single fabrication with a level of care that ultimately protected not just my inheritance, but my own sense of reality itself. I never raised my voice in that courtroom. I didn't need to. 6 recordings, 1 daily log, and one grandfather's careful foresight did what 4 months of systematic manipulation nearly succeeded in destroying completely. Karma doesn't announce itself with shouting. It doesn't arrive the moment betrayal happens. Sometimes it waits patiently in a recorded phone conversation, sitting quietly until the exact moment someone stands in front of a judge and tries to convince the world you can't be trusted with your own life. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, emotional drama, shocking revenge, and the justice that always finds its way back, Subscribe to Story Retribution and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. Tomorrow's story might be even more unbelievable. See you then.